If you were talking to a parent right now who's got a child who's struggling, what would your counsel be? What would you say to them?
First, I'd say take a deep breath. I think one of the things that when I see parents who come to me whose kids are struggling, they inevitably feel guilty. They inevitably say, "I should have come sooner."
Wow.
And I say, no, so first of all, give yourself permission to be imperfect. What happens often is as soon as you see difficulty, you want to fix it. And I think that you need to think in terms of, number one, starting out in a phase of data gathering. Understand, try to figure out what is happening, collect information. And the hardest thing, I think, is to collect information without coming to conclusions.
Wow. Hello, welcome to Thought Club. I'm your host, Elisabeth Gray, here on the show where we try to rethink education and how we might all be better thinkers and better help the next generation to think. I'm here today with a wonderful, very special guest, Dr. Paul Yellin. Dr. Yellin is the founder of the Yellin Center for Mind, Brain, and Education, and he's also the Clinical Associate Professor of Pediatrics at NYU Grossman School of Medicine. Thank you for being here, Dr. Yellin.
What a pleasure it is being here. I've had the pleasure of collaborating with you so many times over the years, and it is just a thrill that you thought to invite me. So thank you.
I'm so glad to be able to have a conversation with you today.
We're usually too busy to have conversations.
Exactly. We're usually too busy. So this is a real gift. So for people who don't know you, Dr. Yellin, what are you up to?
So the Yellin Center for Mind, Brain, and Education, I think people would say, I had a family called me recently and they said, can I answer questions? And she said, you do neuropsychs. I need neuropsych. So people come to us because we do what are called neuropsychological evaluations as a piece of the work. But I think that there are ways to do it. And I see our mission as really trying to help parents understand their children, help children feel empowered and positive about the direction that their lives are going to go. So we do neuropsych evaluations. We also meet with families who are having concerns about their children's behavior, concerns about whether they might have attention problems. And we do some research and we also do some teaching of other professionals around our approach.
But your background originally is in pediatrics, right?
I guess they say that you learn from your children because I was a newborn intensive care specialist, actually.
Wow.
And I did that for almost 20 years. And there's a chunk of my life where I was a hospital administrator. I was the chief medical officer at a hospital that NYU took over when I was on the faculty full-time there. Well, I discovered that I like working with kids way more than I like being a hospital administrator. I'm probably better at it. But I think the issue for us was that one of our own children had a lot of challenges. And what was striking to me was how little, as a pediatrician, I knew about it. And also how the world didn't make sense. My wife called it the department store phenomena, where whoever you saw your kid last, put a label on them. There wasn't this notion. In medicine, there's something that we call differential diagnosis, which means that when you see your doctor, you're expecting them to think of all the possible reasons in some systematic way to understand your symptoms. Whereas what we saw, at least what I would see, is people would put a label on my child and then automatically know what they needed to do. Like, what do you do for a reading problem? And of course, the answer is, any answer is the wrong answer. It's kind of like saying, what do you do for a cough? It kind of depends. Yeah. And so I became fascinated about sort of understanding the work. And I had an opportunity to join an organization that was doing research into understanding how brains learn and also looking at kids from the perspective of understanding their strengths and looking from a strengths-based perspective and also getting to the bottom of their challenges. So this just became a fascinating thing for me. And so I had an opportunity to sort of leave the full-time medical world and start doing this for a not-for-profit organization because they needed some leadership in terms of administration. And I wanted to learn how to do this stuff. And so it just was a good marriage for a number of years. And then I opened up my own place in 2007.
So this sort of subspecialty of behavioral developmental pediatrics has been a few decades now.
Yes, it's been phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I still, find each child that I work with is just fascinating.
Yeah, a unique brain.
Yes.
A unique brain. I'm curious, are there any sort of shifting trends in evaluations in terms of what you're seeing with diagnoses now, over the last 20, 25 years? What are the shifting trends that you're seeing in terms of diagnoses?
On one hand, we are seeing a lot of anxiety.
Mhm.
I think anxiety seems to be very often a part of what we see. And so that we're seeing less and less kids who have straightforward learning problems and kids who are having significant behavioral concerns. I think we're picking up things earlier as well. And I think that there's been a trend around autism. When a medical condition is first discovered, people see the most severe forms.
Mm-hmm.
And as we start to learn more about it, we're starting to see sort of the milder forms. And there's just been a tremendous amount of knowledge gained around sort of how brains sort of understand social interactions, how certain kinds of people are better with pattern. And for example, I think we routinely missed autism in girls. It looks very different than it does in boys.
What does it look like in girls?
Well, I think girls are often able to mask. I remember working with somebody recently, and the way she described it was that she felt like her friends were better at being a person than she was. And I remember years ago, I totally missed it, but a woman was explaining to me. So this was her she was in an Ivy League college, and she was writing a paper for history. And she sort of provided what she wanted to say, but she didn't provide any background. And the professor really dinged her. And she said, well, he's a full tenured professor in history. He doesn't need me to tell him the background. and as I spoke with her, I didn't understand, but I now do understand. So she described the fact that she did fine in social situations, but for her, it wasn't natural. She had to be thinking about it. She saw that other people kind of knew the dance and they knew how to do things. So she, to the outside world, looked like she was doing fine, but she'd come home at the end of the day and she would be absolutely exhausted because it took all of her energy to keep it together. And she didn't look like what most of us would think is somebody with autism. And had I known then what I know now, I think I could have helped her understand herself in a better way. But I thought, and I think most clinicians would have said to her, well, you can't have autism because you're
able
crave,
to.
And you crave social situations.
Yeah.
All of us have parts of our brain that are kind of on manual and parts of our brain that are on automatic.
Yeah.
For some kids, it's reading. For some kids, it's math. For some people, it's how to read social situations.
Yeah.
And the fact that she could outwardly function didn't let us see what it was costing her to behave that way.
Yeah.
And so it was challenging for her. So I think we understand that a lot more now and understand a lot of people who look fine to the outside world, but they go home at the end of the day and they're exhausted. They feel like they have to sort of learn how to behave and how to interact. It doesn't come naturally.
I'm curious about this. If you're a parent at home now and your kid's doing just fine at school and everything, like if life is going well and on cruise control, is there any value to having an evaluation? I mean, is this something that should be reserved for like times of educational crisis, or is it possible that it could really serve more as like a roadmap for understanding how your child learns best?
I think I'm going to sort of answer that sideways and say that I think there's value in understanding every child.
Okay.
I think every human being has some strengths and has challenges. I think that there's a real benefit in looking at that early on. Around almost more than 20 years ago, when I was no longer working in the intensive care unit at the hospital, I got a call from the dean of student affairs at the medical school telling me that he found out that I wasn't where he thought I was supposed to be. And so I said, am I in trouble? And he said, no, actually, we're very intrigued by what you're doing. We want you to start working with medical students. And I said, that's great. I love teaching medical students. He goes, no, you don't understand. We want you to figure out why we have medical students that are on the verge of flunking out of medical school. And what we discovered is that, like the rest of us, medical students don't have perfect brains. They have strengths and they have challenges. But when your strengths are really strong, you can get really, really far in life without knowing that
What
you
your
have
weaknesses
challenges.
are. Yeah.
And suddenly when you bump up, and I'm sure you see that in your work too.
Yeah.
And I realized they were devastated. They come into my office and they'd be in tears. So I would say to them, I know what question's on your mind. And you don't know me well enough to know, but I want to tell you it's not even on the table. The question on your mind is that you're going to go through this process and find out that you don't belong here. And I can tell you that the fact that you're here means you belong here, but that your strengths have been so strong that you've gotten far without needing to have strategies for your challenges. And now we need to figure out what they are. So that was my roundabout answer to your first question, which is, I don't know that everybody needs to go through a comprehensive, using the kind of tools that we use to get deeply into diagnoses. But I think that there are, and I collaborate with folks that are developing tools. We go into schools and work with educators to start thinking about that. There was a psychologist named Carol Dweck, who's most people have heard. She wrote a book called Mindset, but she did this really cool project years ago. What she did was that she spoke to people that were going into high school. She didn't even do an assessment. She just counseled them that everybody has things that go well for them. Everybody has strengths and everybody has challenges. And just that conversation, she found empowered a lot of them. They were willing to take risky classes.
Yeah.
So it helped them see. But, to your point, people shouldn't feel that an assessment is going to damage their child. Yeah. We've had people who come to us with their first child who's struggling in school, and then they go, I'm going to bring my other kid who isn't struggling in school because this was so empowering. So I think that one can benefit from an assessment, but I'll say sometimes, look, it's expensive, and there may be other ways to figure out. Yeah,
it's super interesting. At the same time, I guess I'll play devil's advocate on skipping the evaluation, because I think one of the things we see in our work is that the kids whose strengths have academically held them up for a very long time, or kids who would be diagnosed as twice exceptional, so they're gifted and they have a neurodivergence, they develop a lot of brittleness around change and brittleness around resiliency. And so I do wonder if by a certain age, it's really important to have a clear roadmap of every child's strengths and weaknesses, so that these things don't sort of crystallize or calcify as what sort of turn into sort of personality traits, which I think is something we see. It's like if you get a 20-year-old who's been able to go through school just fine, and you say, wow, you're flunking out of college, my friend. And it's not because you're not smart, it's because you have these weaknesses. There's so much ego attachment to the strengths that there's actually an inability to pivot and address the weaknesses. And so it's something I feel for parents who say to me, I had a kid who was a straight A student, and maybe a little bit anxious, but no big deal. And now I've got a kid in law school or medical school who's flunking out and having real challenges with mental health. And so I just wonder how much of that can actually be avoided by getting a clear map.
I worry about the kids who we see, not just twice exceptional, but kids for whom certain things come so easily that the things that don't come easily get sort of pushed aside. And I feel like I wish I could step into their lives early on and say, don't cut off these things that could bring you joy, that could be interesting. Okay, maybe you're going to be a world-class physicist, but there are these areas that you should be able to enjoy. But what happens often is that they develop this aversion, and they stay away from those things. We're collaborating with Dr. Chavez, who is on the faculty of CSUN, we just published an article with him that's directed to educational therapists. The notion being, in the context of even people, that are out in the field that aren't diagnosticians, are thinking about how do they go through a process of understanding somebody's strengths and challenges,
Yeah.
and look at that so that somebody's coming to him for a math challenge or they're flunking math, but how do you begin to look at those things? I'll tell you a story that I was working with a woman who was a grad student in statistics at an Ivy League college, and she never knew her times tables. And it blew my mind. And she's doing math at a level that, I got to tell you, I had no business assessing her math because I couldn't tell if she was getting it right or wrong. She knew so much math and, way beyond my knowledge. And she turns to me and she goes, I'm stupid. And I said, how is that possible? So she said something that just seemed really poignant to me, but was really telling. She said, well, I can't remember my times tables, and every third grader can remember their times tables. And it struck me. I said, well, what about this math that you're doing? And you know what she said? When I said that, she looked at me and she goes, well, that's easy. And I think that people can devalue the things that they're really good at because it comes easily for them.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I think what comes out of our assessment as much is convincing people of their strengths, because people, especially when you're struggling, you are hearing about your challenges.
Yeah.
And we'll have parents debate, how can his memory be good? He doesn't remember anything that I say. Well, nobody remembers anything that parents say, but his memory is fine. And sort of convincing people of what their strengths are, even when they're brilliant. So I think that you're right that there is a real value. Look, I love doing what I do, and I don't see myself ever stopping. But I don't know that everybody needs a neuropsych, but I do think everybody needs to understand that it's normal to not have a perfect brain.
Yeah.
I look at kids all the time, and sometimes parents will, I can tell they're not happy that I say this, but I'll say, I want to tell you a secret. That for a lot of us, being a grown-up is a lot easier than being a kid. Because in school, they make you think that you're supposed to be good at everything. But here's the secret. To be a successful grown-up, you just have to be good at something.
Yeah.
And you're already good at a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So my job isn't to figure out, you're going to be successful if we don't destroy your self-esteem along the way by making you feel badly about all the stuff that you can do.
And also, I love that. And maybe reimagining this weakness, the addressing the weaknesses as more about the parenting responsibility to develop people of resiliency and strength. This actually may come from Dweck as well. The study of dyslexics and the way that they out-earn people who are not dyslexic. So dyslexics are the richest people on the planet. Why? Because early on, they discovered that there's some things that you just have to be willing to work through, even if you're not ever going to be the best at them. And I think that I see, it's one of the things we're always telling parents. It's like, you got to learn to applaud process, not outcome, because it's so early on that the kids start hearing, they start hearing that outcome praise. And, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old can step away from challenge, that their intuition that they're not going to do something well, because they're already getting that praise for what comes naturally, what comes easily. But I like your reimagining why we're addressing weakness.
It's funny because I was working with a guy who was a brilliant musician. He was like, I don't know, why do I need executive function? So I said, when's the last time you saw the Rolling Stones perform and Keith Richards didn't show up? I mean, really, you have to have some executive function. So it's really, to your point, is to give yourself permission to do the things that you're not great at. Let yourself take certain things pass fail. In your area of strength, you should get an A.
Yeah.
But in those other areas, allow yourself to not get an A and to enjoy them and to grow in those areas.
I love that. Dr. Yellin, if you were talking to a parent right now who's got a child who's struggling, what what would your counsel be? What would you say to them?
First, I'd say take a deep breath. I think one of the things that when I see parents who come to me whose kids are struggling, they inevitably feel guilty. They inevitably say, I should have come sooner.
Wow.
And I say, no, so first of all, give yourself permission to be imperfect. What happens often is as soon as you see difficulty, you want to fix it. And I think that you need to think in terms of, number one, starting out in a phase of data gathering. Understand, try to figure out what is happening, collect information. And the hardest thing, I think, is to collect information without coming to conclusions.
Wow.
Just describe what you see. And it's when I take a history from parents, and even the teacher will go, he doesn't want to write. And I go, well, no, you don't know what he wants to do. Yeah. Tell me what you see. So, observe and try to observe without
narrativizing.
I had a child come into my office. I've told the story a million times, and I probably told it to you because it really struck me. It was a kid who was calling out in class. And they sent him to me because they figured he needed medicine for ADHD. So I looked at him and I said, I got a question for you. And what's that? Has anybody ever asked you why you call out in class? Do you know the answer to that question?
No.
He goes, no, they don't care. They just want me to stop. So I said, I'll tell you a secret. He goes, what's that? I go, between you and me, I don't care if you stop. That's really up to you. I want to know why you do it.
Yeah.
He goes, easy. I'm afraid I'll forget it if I don't say it.
Wow.
So often we attribute a child's behavior to what it means to us.
Right.
And we need to understand their behavior in terms of what it means to them. What's the rules? To me, I used to like to watch CSI and I wanted to be an FBI profiler. So my fantasy is I'm an FBI profiler. And so I think my job—
You're a step away with what you do.
My job is to figure out what are the rules of the universe within which that child's behavior makes sense. Because that's the universe that child is living in. That's what that child is living in. Instead of trying to interpret his behaviors based on, or her behaviors based on what it means to me, they're living those behaviors through what it means to them. So try to, number one is collect data or collect information. And number two then is, are you in an now I have information, now I need to make a decision. And I think collecting data also involves talking to your child's teacher. What's happening in school? What are you seeing? Talking to your child's pediatrician. I have to tell you, I just spoke to somebody he was the friend of a friend, but I said, so what does your pediatrician think? And they said, well, we haven't told her. And so how often do people have concerns about their child and don't think about talking to your pediatrician? And you should, and you can. That you are entitled to get an assessment from your school. You don't have to pay somebody like me. You're entitled to an assessment at no cost by your school. Is the school's assessment going to be as comprehensive as ours? No, but it might be sufficient.
It might be a start.
Yeah. So, and the other, is go by your gut. Trust if you're seeing something that has you concerned, trust your gut. You know your child better than anybody. And I always listen carefully to what parents have to say.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting because I love talking to parents because apples don't fall too far from trees. And so I had a family, we were talking to them about the value of getting evaluated. And the mom said to me, with getting our child evaluated, I realize I don't even know how I work and I don't know how I operate. And I'm really curious about myself. And so it really opened up really fantastic questions for the parents. And the parents are now going on journeys to get their own evaluations so they understand what they're bringing to the table and understand what that tango is between their own unique brains and, the brain of the child that they're attempting to parent. Which, going back to what you say about trying to see things inside the universe of the child, I think one thing that I've found really valuable as a practitioner is having met so many kids and seeing how every single brain is just so unique in this magical, marvelous, intimidating way. And then saying, okay, now what about me? Now, hold the mirror as twere up to nature. Okay, what about my brain and the way that it works? And that it's been through that's also, I think, made me a stronger practitioner, and I think that parents can actually get stronger once they are willing to sort of look in the mirror and get to know their own brains and say, okay, yeah, I am getting to know my 5-year-old's brain. And in the process, I want to figure out how this particular machine works and see, through understanding that, if that in and of itself will help me to guide this person. And it's not uncommon for me, for example, to see a kid gets diagnosed with ADHD or anxiety, and a parent says, "Oh, I think I have that," and then we'll coach the parent, and actually help the parent on their own journey. Not even in the journey of how do I parent this kid, but it's like if we all take responsibility for understanding our own brains, what does that open up in terms of compassion for others and compassion towards ourselves, and really getting the best out of ourselves, the best out of our kids, the best out of everybody.
Well, I was working with a child who came years ago, and he was a very nonlinear thinker.
Yep.
And was very sort of out of the box. And I was talking to the mom, and I'm not a religious person, but I said, sometimes I think the Creator has a strange sense of humor, because he'll give nonlinear children to very linear parents. And the conversation is kind of like, why? If you just did it this way, it would make sense.
Yeah.
And she burst into tears. And I've been trained to feel that when somebody bursts into tears, I did something wrong. So I said, what I did wrong? She turned to him and apologized. She said, I've been angry at him because that's exactly what it is. I'm a very linear thinker, and he's nonlinear. And so understanding your own brain helped him understand his. So there's a book called I'm blocking the name of the author, but it's called The Teaching Brain. And it goes through that notion that teachers need to understand, because it really is a dance. Education is kind of a dance between the teacher's brain and the children's brain. And so understanding how you learn and how you think is really powerful.
Yeah,
absolutely. I just want to say that you do the most amazing executive function work. Your team does. And it's always an honor to be able to assess your kids and to collaborate with you. So I'm really grateful for you inviting me here.
Yeah, I think part of our, as we launch Thought Club, Thought Club is free materials, free curriculum, free support for parents, for kids, in an effort to, I think, try and get the word out there about things that are really achievable to do without spending any money, without turning the world upside down. Because I think our work is actually really impactful to kids, because we don't start from a place of knowing how they should do it. We start from the place of really being curious about how their brain might want to do it and might not be resistant, and it's something we'll say when we start with kids. We'll say, listen, we've been there with our own brains. We all have these points of resistance in each and every one of us does. And so we're here to help you figure out your hacks, but we could get it wrong the first 3 times. Like we could knock on 3 doors that don't open, and then we got to figure out how to crack open that window over there. But even that with kids, to be able to say to them, I don't know, we're not inside your brain. You're inside your brain, and your brain, this has to work for your brain. And there's no one right way to do anything. It's just about figuring out your system that you can be without resistance. So yeah, I love the work we get to do. I feel very privileged to do it.
It really, and being part of people's lives and helping them understand themselves.
It's a good life. It's a good life. Dr. Yellin, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you for inviting me. This is wonderful.
Such a pleasure. And thank you all for joining us. I'm Elisabeth Gray for Thought Club. Please join us, like us, follow us, all those crazy things you can do on social media, and join us in this mission to figure out how we can improve education and improve our thinking, both for ourselves and for the generation ahead. Thanks so much.